The grand hall of the Galactic Federation's central hub shimmered with an otherworldly glow, its vaulted ceilings stretching into a darkness punctuated by faint, twinkling lights that mimicked the stars above. The air hummed with the low murmur of countless voices, each speaking in a language as varied as the species that filled the chamber. Towering beings with exoskeletons that gleamed like polished obsidian stood beside gelatinous forms that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Amidst this kaleidoscope of alien life, one figure stood out, not for its grandeur, but for its simplicity. The human. Alira Voss adjusted the collar of her Federation-issued uniform, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar against her skin. She was the only human in the chamber, a fact that had been made abundantly clear the moment she stepped through the towering doors. Her 2 arms, her bipedal stance, her lack of natural armor. All of it marked her as an anomaly in a room filled with beings who had evolved to thrive in the harshest corners of the galaxy. She could feel the weight of their gazes, some curious, others dismissive, and a few openly hostile. But Alira had learned long ago to wear her differences like armor. She straightened her shoulders and stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor. The council session was already underway, the central dais occupied by the Federation's most influential leaders. Among them was Commander Vrax of the Krelther, a species renowned for their 6 arms and unparalleled dexterity. Vrax's imposing figure loomed over the assembly, his chitinous exoskeleton catching the light in sharp, angular reflections. His primary arms were crossed over his chest, while his secondary arms gestured emphatically as he spoke. His voice, deep and resonant, carried through the chamber with an authority that silenced even the most boisterous delegates. The resources of the Zephyrian sector must be allocated to those who can utilize them most effectively, Vrax declared, his tone leaving no room for dissent. The Krelther have proven time and again that we are the galaxy's foremost engineers and strategists. To entrust these resources to lesser species would be an act of folly. Alira's jaw tightened at the implication. She had heard this rhetoric before, the thinly veiled disdain for species like hers, who lacked the physical advantages of the Krelther or the technological prowess of the Zenari. But she also knew that the Zephyrian sector was more than just a prize to be won. It was a region teetering on the brink of collapse, its inhabitants caught in the crossfire of a conflict that had raged for decades. The Federation's decision would determine whether the sector found peace or descended into chaos. As the debate raged on, Alira found herself reflecting on humanity's place in the galaxy. When Earth had first made contact with the Federation, it had been met with skepticism. Humanity's late arrival on the galactic stage, coupled with their relatively primitive technology, had led many to dismiss them as inconsequential. But Alira had seen firsthand what her species was capable of. She had been part of the team that brokered the Treaty of Altair, a feat that had required not just diplomacy, but an unshakable belief in the power of cooperation. It was that same belief that had brought her here, to the heart of the Federation, where she now stood as the token human, a symbol of her species' potential. The session dragged on, each delegate vying for their share of the Zephyrian sector's resources. Alira listened intently, her mind racing as she pieced together the underlying dynamics at play. The Krelther were not just seeking resources. They were asserting their dominance, sending a clear message to the rest of the galaxy. But Alira also noticed the cracks in their facade, the subtle tension in Vrax's posture, the way his secondary arms twitched when challenged. The Krelther were not invincible, and Alira knew that their overconfidence could be their undoing. Finally, the council chair, a serene Zenari with iridescent scales, called for a recess. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices as delegates dispersed, their conversations a blend of strategy and speculation. Alira remained where she was, her gaze fixed on Vrax as he descended from the dais. She knew that if she was going to make a difference, she would need to confront him directly. Summoning her resolve, Alira approached the Krelther commander. Up close, he was even more imposing, his 6 arms moving with a fluid grace that belied their strength. His compound eyes glinted as he noticed her approach, and a faint sneer curled his mandibles. "Commander Vrax," Alira began, her voice steady despite the tension coiled in her chest. I couldn't help but notice your remarks about the allocation of resources. I'd like to discuss an alternative approach, one that prioritizes the needs of the Zephyrian sector's inhabitants. Vrax's sneer deepened. And what would a human know of the needs of the galaxy? Your species has barely scratched the surface of interstellar travel. You lack the arms to build, the strength to defend, the vision to lead. What could you possibly offer? Alira met his gaze without flinching. We may not have 6 arms, but we have something just as valuable: perspective. The Zephyrian sector doesn't need more weapons or warships. It needs stability, cooperation, and hope. And that's something I believe we can achieve together. For a moment, Vrax was silent, his compound eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then, to her surprise, he let out a low, rumbling laugh. Bold words, human. But words alone will not save the Zephyrian sector. If you truly believe in your cause, prove it. Meet me in the training arena tomorrow. We'll see if your 2 arms can match my 6. Alira's heart pounded, but she nodded. I'll be there. As Vrax strode away, Alira felt a surge of determination. She knew the challenge ahead would be daunting, but she also knew that this was her chance to prove humanity's worth. Not just to the Krelther, but to the entire galaxy. And as she turned to leave the chamber, her mind already racing with strategies, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The game was set and the stakes were high, but Alira Voss was ready to play. The training arena was a vast, domed structure nestled within the heart of the Galactic Federation's central hub. Its walls were lined with holographic projectors that could simulate any environment, from the frozen tundras of Krylos Prime to the molten plains of Infernia. Today, however, the arena was set to its default configuration, a stark, featureless expanse of polished metal that reflected the harsh glow of overhead lights. Alira Voss stood at the center of the space, her boots clicking softly against the floor as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. The air was cool and sterile, carrying with it the faint hum of machinery. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves as she surveyed the room. Commander Vrax entered from the opposite side, his 6 arms moving with a fluid, almost predatory grace. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the lights, and his compound eyes glinted with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Behind him trailed a small group of Krelther observers, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. Alira could feel their eyes on her, their gazes like needles prickling her skin. She forced herself to stand tall, her posture radiating a confidence she didn't entirely feel. So, the human shows up, Vrax said, his voice echoing through the arena. I must admit, I didn't think you'd have the courage to face me. But then again, humans are known for their audacity. Alira met his gaze, her expression calm but resolute. Courage isn't about the absence of fear, Commander. It's about acting in spite of it. And I'm here because I believe in the future of the Zephyrian sector, and in the potential for cooperation between our species. Vrax let out a low, rumbling laugh. Lofty words, but words won't help you here. Today we test your mettle. The game is simple. A series of tasks designed to challenge both physical prowess and mental acuity. You'll need to complete them faster and more efficiently than I can. If you fail, you'll prove that humans are as weak as we've always suspected. If you succeed, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Alira nodded, her mind already racing. She had spent the night reviewing everything she knew about the Krelther. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their cultural values. She knew that Vrax would rely on his 6 arms to outperform her. But she also knew that brute force wasn't always the answer. The key would be to outthink him, to find a way to turn his advantages against him. The first task began with a holographic projection of a complex mechanical device, a puzzle that required precise manipulation of its components to unlock. Vrax stepped forward, his 6 arms moving in perfect synchrony as he began to dismantle the device. His movements were swift and efficient, each arm working independently to tackle a different part of the puzzle. Alira watched for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she studied his technique. Then she stepped forward, her two hands moving with deliberate precision. She started by analyzing the device's structure, identifying the key components that needed to be manipulated. Unlike Vrax, who was attacking the puzzle from multiple angles at once, Alira focused on a single critical point. Her hands moved quickly but carefully, her fingers deftly navigating the intricate mechanisms. She could feel the weight of the Krelther's gazes on her, but she blocked them out, her attention entirely focused on the task at hand. As the seconds ticked by, Alira began to gain ground. Vrax's multiple arms, while impressive, were also a liability. His movements were so rapid that he occasionally misaligned components, forcing him to backtrack. Alira, on the other hand, worked with a methodical precision that minimized errors. By the time Vrax was halfway through the puzzle, Alira had already unlocked the final mechanism. The holographic device emitted a soft chime, signaling her victory. Vrax's mandibles twitched in irritation, but he said nothing. Instead, he gestured to the next task, a test of agility and coordination. The arena's floor shifted, revealing a series of platforms that rose and fell in a chaotic pattern. The objective was to navigate the course without falling, a challenge that would require both speed and balance. Vrax stepped onto the first platform, his 6 arms spreading out to stabilize himself as the platform began to move. He moved with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering his body, his arms adjusting effortlessly to the shifting terrain. Alira followed, her movements more cautious but no less determined. She focused on her center of gravity, using her arms to maintain balance as she leapt from one platform to the next. The Krelther observers murmured among themselves, their tones a mix of surprise and grudging admiration. Alira ignored them, her attention fixed on the course ahead. She could feel the strain in her muscles, the burn of exertion as she pushed herself to keep up with Vrax. But she also noticed something. His reliance on his arms was making him overconfident. He was moving too quickly, taking risks that left him vulnerable. Alira seized the opportunity. As Vrax leapt onto a particularly unstable platform, she adjusted her trajectory, aiming for a more secure path. The platform beneath Vrax tilted sharply, and for a moment, he faltered, his arms flailing as he struggled to regain his balance. Alira used the distraction to surge ahead, her movements precise and calculated. By the time Vrax recovered, she had already reached the end of the course. The Krelther commander's expression was unreadable as he stepped off the final platform. Alira could sense the tension in the air, the weight of his pride pressing down on her like a physical force. But she held her ground, her gaze steady as she met his eyes. 2 tasks down, she said, her voice calm but firm. Shall we proceed to the third? Vrax's mandibles twitched again, but he nodded. You've surprised me, human, but don't think for a moment that this is over. The final task will determine everything. The arena shifted once more, the platforms retracting to reveal a large, circular field divided into sections. Each section was marked with a different symbol, and at the center of the field stood a holographic console. The objective was simple. Input the correct sequence of symbols into the console to activate a beacon. But there was a catch. The symbols were written in a language neither Alira nor Vrax could read, and the console would only accept inputs from one person at a time. Vrax stepped forward, his 6 arms moving with purpose as he began to examine the symbols. Alira watched him for a moment, her mind racing. She knew that brute force wouldn't work here. This task required intuition, creativity, and a willingness to take risks. She closed her eyes, focusing on the patterns she had seen in the symbols. They reminded her of something, though she couldn't quite place it. Alira allowed herself a small smile, though her heart was still pounding. Thank you, Commander. But this isn't just about me or even humanity. Vrax didn't respond immediately, his gaze lingering on the beacon's light. But as he turned to leave the arena, Alira thought she saw a flicker of something in his expression. Something that might have been the beginnings of understanding. And as she followed him out of the arena, her mind already turning to the challenges that lay ahead, she couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The game was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she was playing to win. The journey to the Zephyrian sector was a silent one, the hum of the starship's engines the only sound that filled the cabin. Alira Voss sat in the co-pilot's seat, her gaze fixed on the swirling vortex of hyperspace outside the viewport. The light from the stars streaked past in brilliant ribbons, casting an ethereal glow over the cockpit. Beside her, Commander Vrax operated the controls with his 6 arms, his movements precise and efficient. The tension between them was palpable, a thick undercurrent that neither of them acknowledged. Alira could feel the weight of his gaze occasionally flicking toward her, but she kept her eyes forward, her mind focused on the mission ahead. The Zephyrian sector was a region of space that had been ravaged by decades of conflict. Once a thriving hub of trade and culture, it was now a fractured landscape of warring factions and crumbling infrastructure. The Federation's intervention was meant to bring stability, but Alira knew that true peace would require more than just resources. It would require understanding, cooperation, and a willingness to see beyond old prejudices. She glanced at Vrax, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the cockpit's soft light. He had agreed to accompany her, but she could sense his lingering skepticism. This mission would be a test for both of them. As the starship emerged from hyperspace, the Zephyrian sector came into view. The once vibrant planets now bore the scars of war, charred surfaces, shattered moons, and debris fields that stretched for miles. Alira's chest tightened as she took in the devastation. She had seen images and read reports, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. The sector was a graveyard, its people caught in the crossfire of a conflict they had never asked for. "We'll be landing on Zephyria Prime," Vrax said, his voice breaking the silence. "It's the sector's capital, or what's left of it. The 2 main factions, the Zorons and the KRYLL, are both based there. They've been fighting over control of the planet's remaining resources for years." Alira nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. "Do we have any contacts on the ground? Anyone who might be willing to talk?" Vrax's mandibles twitched. "There's a neutral zone in the capital city where both factions occasionally meet for negotiations. It's heavily guarded, but it's the only place where we might be able to make contact without getting shot on sight." The starship descended through Zephyria Prime's atmosphere, the turbulence shaking the cabin as they approached the surface. The capital city was a sprawling metropolis, its skyline dominated by towering spires that had once been symbols of prosperity. Now, many of them lay in ruins, their jagged edges silhouetted against the smoky sky. The neutral zone was a fortified compound in the heart of the city, its walls lined with armed guards from both factions. Alira could see the tension in their postures, the way their weapons were always at the ready. This was a place where trust was in short supply. As they landed, Alira and Vrax were met by a delegation of guards who escorted them into the compound. The air inside was thick with tension, the walls lined with holographic displays showing the latest casualty reports and resource allocations. Alira could feel the weight of the conflict pressing down on her, the desperation and anger that permeated every corner of the room. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as they were led to a conference chamber. The leaders of the Zorons and the KRYLL were already seated at opposite ends of the table, their expressions hard and unyielding. The Zoron leader, a tall, reptilian figure with scales that shimmered like molten gold, regarded Alira with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The KRYLL leader, a stocky, insectoid being with a carapace that gleamed like polished onyx, seemed equally unimpressed. Alira could feel the animosity between them, a deep-seated hatred that had festered for generations. "Welcome to Zephyria Prime," the Zoron leader said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you've come with more than just empty promises. We've had enough of those from the Federation." Alira stepped forward, her posture calm but confident. "I'm Alira Voss, representing the Galactic Federation. This is Commander Vrax of the Krelther. We're here to help broker a peace agreement between your factions and allocate resources to rebuild the sector." The KRYLL leader let out a harsh, clicking laugh. "Peace? Rebuild? You think it's that simple? The Zorons have been stealing our resources for decades. They've left us with nothing but ash and ruin. There can be no peace until they've paid for what they've done." The Zoron leader's eyes narrowed, his scales rippling with anger. And what of the KRYLL's atrocities? Their raids on our settlements? Their destruction of our infrastructure? You speak of justice, but you've done nothing to earn it. Alira raised a hand, cutting off the argument before it could escalate. I understand that there's a long history of conflict between your factions, but continuing this cycle of violence will only lead to more suffering. The Federation is willing to provide the resources needed to rebuild, but only if you're willing to work together. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Alira could see the doubt in their eyes, the skepticism that came from years of betrayal and mistrust. But she also saw something else, a flicker of hope, buried deep beneath the layers of anger and resentment. It was a small thing, but it was enough. We'll need time to consider your proposal, the Zoran leader said finally, his tone guarded but not dismissive. Agreed, the Caruella leader added, though his expression remained hard. But don't expect us to trust you, or each other, so easily. Alira nodded, her mind already racing with the next steps. Take the time you need. But remember, the future of the Zephyrian sector depends on the choices you make now. As they left the conference chamber, Vrax fell into step beside her. You handled that well, he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. But don't think for a moment that this will be easy. These factions have been at war for generations. Changing their minds won't happen overnight. Alira glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. I know, but every journey begins with a single step. And if we can get them to take that first step, we might just have a chance. Vrax didn't respond immediately, his compound eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then, to her surprise, he inclined his head, a gesture of respect, if not outright agreement. Perhaps you're right, human, but the real test is yet to come. As they stepped out into the ruined streets of Zephyria Prime, Alira felt a surge of determination. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she was ready to face them. For the first time, she felt like she was making a difference, not just for the Zephyrian sector, but for the galaxy as a whole. And as she looked out at the shattered city, her resolve only grew stronger. The game was far from over, but she was playing to win.